Are you still building and deploying your applications by hand? Okay, you need to stop that. Let's take a look at GitHub Actions and we'll help you get away from that. Hey chatters, my name is Brendan, and on today's episode of DevChatter, we're going to be looking at the basics of GitHub Actions so that you can start building your own custom GitHub Actions. Let's get started. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is go ahead and create a new repository. You're going to want to go to github.com/new to create a new repository, assuming you're logged in, of course, and you'll create a new repository. For this, let's start off by creating one in our own account, and we're going to go ahead and name it First GitHub Action. Now that we've got a name, we want to go ahead and set a couple of things. First off, always add a README, because that's just a good way to make sure there's information about the repository when anyone goes to that page, including your future self. Now that we've created this, you've got a repository. Let's go ahead and edit the README. We're going to put in, this is my first, not mine, GitHub Action. Changes here will trigger the action I create. Okay, so we have made a modification directly to our main page. Obviously, on GitHub, if you didn't know, you can make changes to your files. You don't have to change them locally and push them up to GitHub. It has the basic editing controls to be able to do some modifications itself. So before we get started, all the actions that you create in GitHub Actions are going to be created as files in source control. This has a huge advantage, and part of the reason why is that when you are developing your application, if you need to change how it gets built, you change those files. They're in source control with the version. So if you need an older version, the files to build that one are there. If you need the newer version, the files to build the newer version are there. And so it's a win-win. You get to keep the correct files with the correct code. So if you're not used to that, if you have an entirely separate system for building that is, say, a separate server and it does not depend directly on those files, you may know why it is so important to keep these the same. So you don't have to go, okay, we're going to change the build script, so we got to make sure that we've uploaded the new version at the same time and we're ready to go. No, that's crazy. We don't want to do that. Let's jump into actions, and we're going to create our first one. So when you go here, it has a whole bunch of defaults. We're going to look at that for future stuff because these templates and defaults that are created here are really useful. There are some that you can just grab and it will build your application the way you need it to with just a couple of tweaks. But for us, let's go ahead and start with the simple workflow. So the minimum necessary structure. This is going to create a file at .github/workflows. You'll notice here at the top that it says first GitHub Action /.github/workflows, and this is the folder where all of your workflows are going to go. This is a special folder. There are actually a lot of files that can be inside of .github, not just the workflows. That's why the workflows are in a sub workflows folder. From here, there's a couple of things we want to look at. The first is this gets a name. It starts off with CI for continuous integration. So this would be for when you're using this as part of your regular integration build process. We're not going to do that. We're starting simpler. So let's change the name from, say, CI to Hello World. So yes, I know I reverted to Hello World from a more advanced one. It's okay. The next section that you're going to find in these files is the on section. In this case, we have said on pushes to the main branch, or on pull requests into the main branch. Since we are just doing this as a little bit of a testing and experiment, let's remove the pull request one because we're not going to do that. Though in a lot of cases, the first workflow that I will add to most systems is one that does this. It is the check the PRs going into our main branch. So that is very, very common first thing that I will put in. Usually when I have that, I would name it something like the PR main branch or something like that. So that's the workflow for PRs into the main branch, and people know that. Obviously, if I do that for, say, any branch, like if we're doing other branches, we say any PR into a branch goes through this same process, then you just call it PR branch, depending on your structure. For us, let's put it back to hello world, and we're going to remove pull request because we don't need it for our case. They put a little note here. They made this a workflow dispatch version. So this, even though they put it down below, is actually part of the on still. So this triggers on pushes to branches named main. If we wanted to add more, we could have said like on branches named main or dev, but we're not going to do that, or any other names we wanted. We also say that this should trigger on workflow dispatch. This is the way of saying, I want to be able to manually trigger this. And not all workflows are able to be manually triggered. Obviously, you could make any one of yours manually triggered if you want, but there are reasons that some shouldn't be. And so this one, we're going to let it be manually triggered because, again, if it's just saying hello, why does it matter whether it was triggered by a source change or not? Let's come down here. We're going to delete some of these comments because most of these comments are... They're useful the first time you read it, and with a little bit of explanation, you won't need them again. For this, everything happens as part of jobs in a workflow. This is where the things happen. Our first job gets its name based on what we call the job. This first one is just called build, but we're not building, we're saying hello. So I'm going to rename that to say hello. Don't be fooled, the build was not a keyword. So I'm going to say hello. And then the next thing is it says runs on, and it says Ubuntu Linux. Okay, cool. So it could be on Ubuntu latest, or it could also be on Windows latest if you want. You can get more specific than that, but I highly recommend for 99.9% of you, either Windows latest or Linux latest is going to be the right answer. If you're one of those people on .NET Core or .NET, then Ubuntu latest is probably going to work out best for you for most of your stuff. Obviously, you can do separate development and testing in both. I work with a lot of clients where we have where we use both the Windows and the Linux servers. So let's leave it on Ubuntu for now because we don't need something else. Every job has something else in it. It has steps. These are the steps that the job takes. The first one that is going to be, I recommend you put this first every time you need it. If your step uses the source of the repository, start with a checkout. This action is ubiquitous. You're going to find it pretty much everywhere. You're going to see this in so many workflows. You just uses actions checkout. Don't bother putting names with this step. Don't bother doing anything else. That step is fine the way it is. Everybody who works with GitHub Actions is used to seeing this. You see this and you're like, okay, there's your checkout. Because that's so ubiquitous and doesn't ever fail or anything like that, you just leave it alone because that one is going to work. It's going to be fine. You don't need to worry about detecting that one in the log. Oh, can we check and see if it checked out just fine? Like, that's not going to be your problem. You're more likely to run into something down here. So this step has a name. So the name is actually what's going to appear in the results of your build. So name it something that's going to make sense to you. So if a part fails, you know where it fails. Run a one-line script is actually not a great name. This should be something like display the hello world text, right? Because we know what it was. They didn't know what the one-liner is. We know what it is. So we're saying echo hello world. Now, the next thing they're showing here is they're trying to give you an example of how to run multi-line scripts. Now, I do frequently use multi-line scripts, and in fact, sometimes I use the multi-line script format just because I like seeing the separate piece and going like, okay, run, and then here's the script it ran. And that's up to you. I recommend for a lot of cases, if it doesn't need to be multi-line, I find that it's a little bit clearer to do it as two separate steps. So I will write two steps instead of a multi-line step, just for a little bit of extra clarity, if it's possible that one of those steps could fail. If all you're doing is echoing, right, they're not going to fail. They're not. So it's totally like, either all echoes are failing or none of them are failing in this case. I wouldn't worry too much about that. But this is our first one. Now, why did it check out the code? I don't know. This is hello world. We shouldn't really have had that in here. So for now, I'm going to put a number sign here, and that's going to comment that out. Let's go ahead and try running hello world, and this will be our first workflow. I'm going to rename it hello before I commit. So whenever you're making these changes, they have this special structure for when you're working on workflows. And part of the reason is they have this whole marketplace of additional workflow actions that you can get. So if you are needing to, install some build requirements before your project can be built, you're going to find those here. You'll notice Setup.NET Core SDK is one of the actions listed here. So if you are doing .NET Core development, you might want to have that. Let's go ahead and commit our change. Yes, I'm just going to leave it with create hello. It's a hello world workflow. Okay, now let's jump to actions real quick. And let's see if it is. We're going to click on enable actions. And is it going to go? You know what? Let's trigger a couple. So we said any pushes to main are going to cause this. So we're just going to say ping. And then we're going to say pong. And we're going to go have a look at the actions. Let's go ahead and run the dispatch version. If we take a look at the result, we are waiting for it to actually go ahead and give us a runner. And there we go, job completed. So it displays hello world. It runs a multi-line script. So that was just the default one they had there. And then it completes the job. So some of the little actions that you put in there actually have their own wrap up at the end. So just bear that in mind, that sometimes you're going to have steps that were not included in your workflow down at the bottom. And if we look here at the actions, you'll see that it looks like it did trigger all of mine. So it looks like what was probably happening is it was waiting in the queue to get a runner, and that's why it didn't start the initial ones. But you'll see now that it did create hello, update, and then this, I believe, is the this is the manually triggered one, and these were triggered by my pushes that I did. You'll see it built a few times, and each one of these is going to have the same kind of result. You just go in and you say, oh look, there's the result, and they come back green. So hooray, we've got some working workflows. Let's talk about other stuff that we can do. So if we create a new workflow, I mentioned that some of these are a little bit more complex. We're not going to build these ones today. We'll do another video for that. So make sure you subscribe to this channel so you can check out those videos as well. And be sure to click the like down below as well. Let's take a look at the kind of stuff it can do, and you'll get an idea of it. And we're going to take a look at some of these in our next video. So the next thing that we're going to want to take a look at is, let's say that we want to build .NET. You'll see that we have immediately, just from searching that, you can get desktop apps for building, testing, signing, and publishing .NET applications. So, maybe you've had to deal with that before. Maybe you work on web projects in .NET. Well, they've got an action specifically for you. When you click on this, it brings up basically what we had before. This one names itself .NET.YAML. But don't worry about that. For yours, you're probably going to, again, name it something like PR-CI or something like that, so that you know where in your workflow this one happens. And you're going to give it a name like pull request review. When you go in here, you're going to want to take a look at what it's doing, and that is it's triggering on pushes to the main branch or pull requests to the main branch. Down here, again, remember what I said, Ubuntu latest is what it's going to run on when you are using .NET. Now, why is it running Ubuntu instead of Windows? The short answer is GitHub charges you less money for the minutes that you use on this. And now before I scare you away, they also give you thousands of minutes. I think it's like a couple thousand minutes. I forget the exact amount. But you don't have to worry about that unless you are really overusing this or using it for big taxing stuff. GitHub offers enough free minutes to general users. Look up what yours are, and then there's also fractions of cents for minutes additional to that. So unless you're a really heavy user trying to use like the GitHub Actions to really powerhouse a lot of work for yourself, you're not going to hit those limits. And if you do, it should not get too expensive. But again, take a look at the pricing just to make sure. Step 1. Remember how I said the first thing you're always going to see is that checkout. Then the other one that we talked about that was over on the side that you're not seeing here is we're including the tools to be able to build .NET. So right here we've got a step that got named setup.net, and it grabs the action. So actions, remember what I said, actions, that's what these are here on the side, are pieces that you can sort of run that are not your custom code, but you're running someone else's action. That's going to be code. So for those, there are more official ones and less official ones. So make sure you do your homework before you go and grab some action from some random person. Again, on this one, it has a parameter. So it says with .NET version. So you can say, hey, I'm building a .NET 6 app. Obviously, if you're building .NET 5, use that. And any other version, choose whatever it is. Maybe you're on 7. Next thing you're going to need to do is start building your .NET Core, your .NET. I caught myself. If you haven't seen my video explaining the difference between .NET Core, .NET Framework, and .NET, check that out. There's links to it down below. So in here, you can restore dependencies, and that is basically going to tell .NET, hey, go out, grab your NuGet packages, and build. And it's going to use the standard stuff unless you have configured it to do otherwise. .NET Build, again, because we just did a restore, we're doing one without a restore. You'll find this very common inside of workflows, not just in GitHub Actions, but in other places as well. They separate out the steps so that if something fails in just the restore dependencies, you know it was the restore that failed. If it's failed in the build, you know it was the build that failed. If you failed in the test, you know it was the test that failed. Whereas if you just called .NET test, well, it would restore and build and test, but you'd see that that failed, and you don't immediately know which one failed and which one succeeded. Because if you see test failed, but build and restore passed, then you know it was probably a test itself that failed, without even digging into the results. Whereas if you just had it as one step, you can't as quickly identify the problem. So try to separate out into these steps. But this is the basic structure. And next time, as I said, we're going to be doing a follow-up video. So again, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you get this. I want to do a video where we are going to start with a .NET application, .NET 6 probably, because 7, at least at the recording of this, is still a preview. We're going to take a .NET 6 app, and we're going to build it with a GitHub action, protect the branch in GitHub, and watch how the PR gets run and it reviews it so that we can use that as part of our workflow. Hey, thanks for watching this episode of DevChatter with me. If you enjoyed this content, be sure to subscribe and click the bell icon down below to be notified of our newest videos. If you want to catch more of us, be sure to join our Discord. You can find a link to that down below. Have a great day, and happy coding, everyone.